One of the perks and challenges of playing Space Marines, whether you're going with a Codex compliant chapter like Ultramarines, Raven Guard, or Salamanders, or one of the divergent chapters like Blood Angels, Black Templars, or of course the Howling Space Wolves, is that there's an almost infinite variable ways to build your army. There's no other faction in Warhammer 40,000 that has near to the unit selection available to Adeptus Astartes. And again, this is a perk, since you've got so much choice to build out the aesthetic of your army. The thing is, this quickly becomes a challenge as well, particularly for newer players, once you start to bring your units together on the tabletop. So much choice can come at the cost of army synergy and cohesion. In casual play, just throwing your favourite units together can be fun, but it often isn't the most optimal way to pull together a competitive force. So in this video, we're going to run through the core detachments and Codex Space Marines. We'll look at the core detachment rules, enhancements and stratagems, and the kinds of units that might be most impactful in each. Note, I'm not going to lean too heavily into meta-optimal unit selection in this list, though I will allude to some of the most common unit selections in tournament play where relevant. The reason for this is that I want to keep an open mind about all of the detachments available in this video, assuming that you're balancing a fun, thematic army that's going to stand on its own legs on the tabletop, rather than chasing podium finishes at grand tournaments. In reality, if you're chasing medals, your detachment choice is going to be a lot smaller, as most are designed to enhance fun and flavour, not necessarily optimization. I'll also focus on one of the divergent chapters, Space Wolves of course, and their unique detachments and how it impacts on unit choice both from a Codex supplement and Codex Space Marines perspective. Games Workshop have moved in an interesting direction with Space Wolves and Black Templars on the release of their new Codex supplements in 10th edition. Effectively, they've diluted the effectiveness of non-divergent Space Marines units inside their unique detachments by restricting leadership choices and stratagems to keywords. By doing this, they've pushed the benefits of building divergent armies with actual divergent units in them inside of these detachments. I suspect the other divergent chapters have this approach to look forward to in their future Codex supplement releases too. Welcome to my mini Grimdark. Here's a list of the detachments we'll cover in this video. It includes the core detachments from Codex Space Marines along with the Space Wolves detachments from Codex Supplement Space Wolves. The basic principle of the video can be applied to any detachment though, once you start getting a feel for utilising stratagems and unit synergy. Let's start with Codex Space Marines and one of my favourites for casual play, First Company Taskforce. In Space Marine chapters, First Companies are elites of the chapter, their most seasoned and experienced warriors tempered by service and garnished with the most advanced armour and weaponry. First Companies are made up of Terminator units, Blade Guard and Champions, notably the Death Wing with the ivory-clad Terminators and the Blood Angels as Archangel Company, which acts as the tip of Dante's spear, are two of the most famous First Companies. The detachment rule is Extremist Level Threat. It means that once per battle, you can enhance the Oath of Moment enhancement to give a reroll to wounds as well as reroll to hit. It's solid in the moment, but I feel like Games Workshop were a little too reserved with this one, making it just once per game. Regardless, you'll be able to demolish a tough opponent in the turn that you use it. Enhancements in the detachment are pretty straightforward and strong too, Imperium's Sword for +1 attacks being one of my favourites for a simple and impactful enhancement. Two of the enhancements are Terminator character only, Iron Resolve in particular is great for a 5+ Feel No Pain for the character, and a once per game 5+ Feel No Pain for his unit as well. When you look at the stratagems, you can immediately see what units this detachment wants you to play. With the exception of Armour of Contempt, all of the stratagems are for specific units, namely Terminators, Blade Guard veterans, Stern Guard veterans, and Vanguard veterans. All of the stratagems are usable, even if they aren't particularly stand out. I like the utility of Duty of Honour for maintaining control of an objective when you move off, Heroes of the Chapter for +1 to hit and +1 to wound if your unit's below half strength, as well as Legendary Fortitude for -1 damage for incoming attacks. The key point though, if you're building an army composing primarily of specialised Space Marine units and heroes, like Terminators, Assault Terminators, Blade Guard, Stern Guard and Vanguard, then this detachment could work very well for you. That said, if you look at any of the Divergent chapters, you'll immediately see a challenge. Terminators share the Terminator keyword, so Wolfguard Terminators, just like Deathwind Terminators for Dark Angels for instance, these units could take advantage of the stratagems and would fit into this detachment quite nicely. That's it though. None of the other equivalent units have keywords that make them compatible with this detachment, so Wolfguard Headtakers and Inner Circle Companions, for example, they can't utilize any of the stratagems that would benefit Blade Guard, Vanguard, or Sternguard veterans, for instance. You'll have to look into the Codex supplement for these units. So if you're taking any of the units that these stratagems target, this detachment is fun and thematic to get the best out of these units. I would say at this stage that whilst you can absolutely make this detachment and these units effective, they aren't generally considered the most optimal in competitive play. I enjoy Terminators a lot. I particularly like multiple units of them trudging up the battlefield towards the enemy in casual play, but they often struggle to put out either the utility or the damage I'd like them to in order to justify the investment of points being made on the unit. They still look awesome though. Next up, Anvil Siege Force. Units will get a really strong army-wide buff to range fire by giving all ranged weapons the heavy trait for +1 to hit when stationary. If the unit already has this, they also get +1 to wound as well when they're stationary. It's a really solid buff and it's easy to make impactful, but it hinges on your unit standing still and shooting. An immediate hint to the kinds of units that this detachment wants you to run. The enhancements similarly benefit ranged fire to an extent, Architect of War being my favourite for giving the ignores cover trait to the leader and to their unit. None of the stratagems are restricted to any specific units in particular, so in theory you could apply any unit to this detachment effectively, but the stratagems do reinforce units holding position or again working at range. There are plenty of units in Codex Space Marines that could fit this bill, but you're looking for units that have the range output to be able to stand and shoot, like Heavy Intercessors, Desolators, Dreadnoughts, Eliminators, Eradicators, Sternguard, and a number of their tanks, as well as the likes of Terminators for their ability to hold the line. That's not to say you can't mix in a few units outside of this for extra flexibility. Assault Intercessors or Infiltrators, for example, would give you some strategic value, but you'll want to lean heavier on ranged units and units that can hold territory to take advantage of the detachment rules and stratagems. Firestorm Assault Force's detachment rule, Close Range Eradication, grants your units the assault trait on all of their weapons for advance and shoot capability. If the unit already has the trait, they get +1 strength on the attack as well. Not quite as good as +1 to wound would have been, of course, but it's still a very strong detachment rule that, in theory, could benefit any unit and allows your army to move quickly and still fire on the enemy. The enhancements on the detachment aren't too restricted. My favourite is War-Tempered Artifice, for a simple +3 to strength for the bearer's melee weapons. This can turn a strong melee character into a tank buster. The stratagems of the detachment do paint a more vivid picture of the kinds of units that are best deployed here. Crucible of Battle for +1 to wound at only 6 inches, Immolation Protocols for devastating wounds trait on torrent weapons, Onslaught of Fire for +1 to hit coming out of a transport, and Burning Vengeance for disembarking out of sequence and shooting at the enemy that attacked it. The detachment wants you to run short-range units, torrents and melters, for instance, moving quickly up the battlefield and jumping from transports to assault the enemy. Again, there's nothing to say you can't run other units here. Lots of Space Marines units will enjoy the assault trait, but taking advantage of the detachment's offerings will require you to tailor your list somewhat with transports, flame units, and other units proficient at short range. On a personal note, I think the detachment goes too heavy on situationally strong buffs and not heavy enough on enhancing the damage of flamers and melters. Short-range firepower is a risky army focus at the best of times, since it requires you to take risks to get your units into range and then stay there. If the detachment wants you to build an army around this risk, I'd have liked it to reward it a bit more. That said, again, the detachment special rule is strong and it's competitive. I'm not going to cover it in this video because I haven't played with or against it yet, but the new Forge Father Seeker's detachment does what I'd like it to do with this regard. It appears to operate very similarly to Firestorm Assault, but with additional buffs to flame weapons and more general purpose stratagems like fall back and shoot, for example. It's especially effective if you run an army with the Salamander's epic hero Vulcan Hestan. Worth a look if this is your jam. Gladius Taskforce is undoubtedly the most versatile detachment in Codex Space Marines. The doctrines of the detachment allow you to pivot between advance and charge, advance and shoot, or to be able to shoot or charge after falling back on an army-wide basis, albeit only once per battle each. This is strong and very flexible. Every Space Marine unit and character will benefit from at least one of these on a general basis. The stratagems give you fight on death, lance traits, ignores cover traits, or reactive moves, along with a couple of ways to alter your doctrines. There isn't much point on listing or considering the specific units for this detachment because there aren't really any restrictions. There isn't anything in Codex Space Marines that couldn't fit into this detachment. It's fiddly though, for a newer player in particular, as the doctrines are going to be best used at specific times in the battle, so there is a bit more strategic thinking involved. That said, it's also quite forgiving as a detachment because it lets you put whatever you want onto the battlefield, particularly in casual play, and you won't feel like any of your units are wasted or out of place. Ironstorm Spearhead grants your Adeptus Astartes units a reroll to hit, wound, and damage in each phase. This is pretty strong and reliable. The enhancements are primarily focused on supporting vehicles or are Tech Marine specific. Adept of the Omnissiah being a personal favourite, allowing the Tech Marine to change an attack against a vehicle within 6 inch to 0 damage in each battle round. The stratagems are then mostly focused on buffing vehicles and walkers. There are some great buffs here, and this is a powerful detachment that has seen success in tournaments throughout 10th edition Warhammer 40,000, as long as you're building a tank and a Dreadnought heavy force. Note, since Divergent Chapter Vehicles and Walkers lets you use the Space Wolves Wolf and Dreadnought Epic Hero Murderfang as an example, have the keywords Adeptus Astartes and Vehicle or Walker in all of the cases that I've reviewed. These unique units can thrive in this detachment as well. Ever dreamed of a Space Wolves army made up entirely of venerable Dreadnoughts, Wolfen Dreadnoughts, Murderfang, and Bjorn the Fell-Handed, anyone? The Iron Priest has the Tech Marine keyword, and as such can take the enhancements that Tech Marines can take as well. Not necessarily optimal for competitive play, but potentially very fun to throw on the table in casual settings. Maybe just be sporting and make sure your opponent knows what you're doing. It wouldn't be much of a fun game if they rock up with a horde army with no ability to take down your dreads considered. Librarius Conclave is a lot of fun if you like Psychers. The detachment rules are locked down to Adeptus Astartes Psyker units, meaning you'll need to take characters with the Psyker keyword to benefit. There are a number of librarians to choose from, and each can lead a good array of different units, so this isn't necessarily a problem for Codex-compliant chapters at all. Since the psychic disciplines can be assigned at the start of the battle round and used multiple times in the same game, you can create specialized armies at your discretion, within the limitations of what loadouts you have available at your psychers. For example, you can go heavy on Phobos Marines and Phobos Librarians, and most of the disciplines will have their place at different times. Since there are no psychers on bikes currently, or with jump packs, or vehicles with the psyker keyword outside of Divergent Chapters at this time, building armies around these units wouldn't afford them benefit in this detachment. Whilst the detachment rules and enhancements are dedicated to psychers, the stratagems on the other hand will buff or debuff units within a bubble around your psychers. Your unit will benefit if they're within 18 inches of a psyker on the most part, for instance. This is strong when you're considering your list, since you don't need to have a psyker for every unit, you just need to have enough psychers to hand out the strong buffs and debuffs and survive the battle long enough to be impactful. The stratagems are really strong too, -1 to be hit, +1 strength, handing out mortal wounds or the hazardous trait, giving lethal hits to attacks. The psychic discipline interacts with these to enhance their effectiveness as well, so like Gladius Taskforce, there is a strategic element to consider, but otherwise your list building is quite free in this detachment, as long as you're happy to take a lot of psychers to hand out buffs and debuffs where you need them. Really fun detachment though, one you can create a very interesting, thematic and actually very competitive list around too. It's a personal favourite, even if it has limited utility for dedicated Space Wolves units I love, since there's currently only Niall with a Psyker keyword in the Codex in the absence of general purpose Rune Priests, but that's a gripe for another day. Stormlance Taskforce is a good solid detachment that allows your entire army to charge even after it's advanced or fallen back in the same turn. Immediately there is a specific benefit to melee units over ranged units here. The enhancements are similarly movement focused, allowing for shooting after falling back or charging for example, and some are locked to mounted characters like Bike Chaplain. Stratagems are equally restricted to mounted units and vehicles in this detachment too. Simply, if you've ever dreamt of a large army of Space Marine bikers backed by tanks and vehicles roaring to battle, this is your detachment. Casually, tons of fun. Aesthetically and as a hobbying project, everybody's going to love your army, and you will too. On the tabletop, mounted units have had a bit of a harder time on terrain-dense tables since they have to go around it. This can have a surprisingly direct impact on the outcome of a game, so you'll probably still want to sneak in a few units to support them. The humble intercessors, or some jump pack intercessors for example. Divergent chapters like Space Wolves and Dark Angels also have mounted units in Thunderwolves and Ravenwing of course. these units will be at home here too. Finally, from the core Codex Space Marines detachments, Vanguard Spearhead. The detachment rule is really strong, giving all the Adeptus Astartes units a -1 to be hit modifier and the benefit of cover against all attacks outside of 12 inches. The enhancements are strong too, with Ghostweave Cloak being my favourite for stealth and lone operative on an Adeptus Astartes model. If you've played against that blasted lieutenant with combi weapon, you'll know how troublesome this combo can be. There are 2 Phobos only enhancements. The stratagems are very strong too, with a buff to AP being really effective for mass fire shooting against tougher opponents, the ability to sabotage an objective so it dishes out mortal wounds as well as becomes sticky, and guerrilla tactics for lifting units off the battlefield and into strategic reserves being some of the highlights. I've played this detachment with my Space Wolves, creating a hunting party made up of Headtakers, Wolf and Thunderwolf cavalry, Bloodclaws and Grey Hunters. As well as being a lot of fun, it's also surprisingly effective too. The stratagems allowed my Grey Hunters to punch up with their extra AP, and Deadly Prize allowed my Thunderwolves to take and then leave an objective in order to tie up the foe, keeping it under my control. Guerrilla Tactics is just strong for repositioning any infantry units. Again, a strategic detachment, but it has flexibility so it won't impact too much on your unit choice. Almost all of these detachments want you to play a certain way, with Gladius Taskforce being the primary exception. Just because you love infiltrating and scouting units, it doesn't mean you need to play Vanguard Spearhead, nor do you need to play Ironstorm Spearhead if you love your dreadnoughts. That said, weigh up the benefits to each of your units in each of the detachments. Have a look at the stratagems and think about which units in your list would benefit from them. If you're choosing between a couple of small units of infiltrators or a unit of assault terminators, whilst they both come out at similar points, which will interact with your army rules and stratagems the best? With regards to the divergent detachments, and of course the detachments and Codex supplement Space Wolves, there are 3. Saga of the Hunter is arguably the weaker of the 3 detachments because it's potentially harder to activate. Firstly, you do need to build your army around the core mechanic in order to access the benefits of the detachment. In order to access the buffs, you either need to outnumber your opposition in melee by model count, or have multiple friendly units within engagement range of the same unit. The positive here is that the unique Space Wolves units are very well suited to this task. Bloodclaws and Grey Hunters, both of which will love +1 to hit in melee, are generally larger units. Few armies run units bigger than 10 on a regular basis, so in most cases you have a genuine chance to just outnumber the foe in model count when you get into combat. To avoid relying on this though, Space Wolves have access to some good throwaway units that other Space Marines armies usually don't. Hunting Wolves, if you run Headtakers, or Fenrisian Wolves are really good at this. You buddy your wolves up with your units, and their long threat range means you should be able to get them into combat with the same enemy units where required. I also find that Wolfen units love this detachment. I ran a Wolfen Dreadnought with 2 Wolfen units last time out with this detachment, and they essentially just ate everything in front of them, getting +1 to hit, taking them to 2s, and then once the saga was completed they got +1 to wound as well. When building your list, you'll need to remember 2 key things. Unit count and model count are beneficial to this saga. If you prefer running elite armies with multiple Wolfguard units and expensive named characters, this detachment isn't optimal for you. Secondly, non-Space Wolves units can contribute by being your second unit in melee, but they can't benefit from the saga buffs or stratagems, nor can non-Space Wolves units contribute towards completing the saga. So you're looking to build an army with lots of units, as many as possible being unique Space Wolves units. Here's my list from my last outing for this detachment as an example. It was a casual game against Astra Militarum Force. Note, the 2 Dreadnoughts get no benefit from the saga or stratagems in this detachment, and I knew it before I took them. They still played a very important role in giving me a ranged threat against an opponent that was always likely to dominate in this arena. Also to note, one didn't survive long enough to cause any meaningful damage, and the other was destroyed in turn 4, but combined they absolutely paid for themselves as they soaked up big firepower I didn't want near Murderfang or the Wolfen. Saga of the Bold also forces your hand in almost the opposite way that Saga of the Hunter does. In this detachment you need your units to be led by characters in order to gain the benefits from the detachment and stratagems. Again, here's a list I ran a few times with this detachment. The ranged support units don't benefit from saga or stratagems, but I found them important. Similarly, the scout unit can't access the stratagems, but their guerrilla tactics and the ability to infiltrate makes them a great utility unit regardless for competitive play. After that, lots of units with strong leader characters and epic heroes, all set to get to the enemy. You could switch Logan Grimnar into this detachment in place of Bjorn, or one of the Headtaker's units potentially. This would optimize it further potentially with his CP tax special rule, and it would give you the option to deep strike Aryak and his Wolfguard Terminators in on turn 1. The important thing here is that it's a very different army from exactly the same resource pool designed for the detachment. This was a friendly competitive game against someone wanting to try a new detachment for their Tyranid army. Finally, Saga the Beastslayer. This is essentially the Space Wolves' Gladius, in that the detachment rule befitting the units with lethal hits can be applied to non-Space Wolves units as well. That said, you'll see from my list I'd still prefer to run Space Wolves units. Firstly, from an aesthetic perspective, but also because the enhancements and stratagems in this detachment are still primarily Space Wolves units only. I go for mass attacks in this one, something Space Wolves are very efficient at. In this particular list, I have hired in a unit of infiltrators to hold the backfield with their anti-deep strike bubble of 12 inches. Grey Hunters occupy the midboard, whilst Bloodclaws and Wolfen just surge forward and do what they do in melee as quickly as possible. It's a very ABC force, and it'll work great against some foes, terrible against others. I decimated Sisters of Battle with this army. I was humbled considerably by my arch nemesis the Custodes with exactly the same list. That lesson is for another video though, I guess. Needless to say, it's a powerful detachment and you can drop any number of Space Marines units into it and they'll all enjoy lethal hits. I obviously had to draw a line somewhere, though I could easily have talked about these individual detachments for an hour apiece. Hopefully this video succeeds in at least inspiring some considerations around your collection, playstyle, or current army lists, and how they do or might synergize on the tabletop. As I said, with so much choice, you'd think building a Space Marines army would be easier. Truthfully though, it creates challenges too, and if you take even great units, but put them in the wrong detachment, you might miss out on optimization that can make a huge difference in game. I generally love to hear your thoughts. I've got no doubt that there are thousands of little synergies that I haven't included here, so let us know what unit and detachment combos you've had success with in the comments below. And if this video has been at all helpful, please like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. Keep hobbying.